Hey everybody, welcome to today's video, which is going to be the fourth and final part of the Ford Ranger manual transmission swap video series. As you'll see in a few minutes, the swap is done, but what I wanted to do in today's video is that I wanted to cover some things that I ran across during the swap that were problems for me, and I want to do that to make sure that if you do this swap, you don't have the same problems that I did. After that, we'll go ahead and take the truck for a test drive. Okay, as you can see here, I have a few parts. These are pretty much going to be the center of our discussion. So let's get started. The first one I have here is the sleeve yoke or slip yoke, whatever you want to call it, for the front of the drive shaft. I did talk a little bit about drive shafts in one of the other videos, but mostly about lengths. What I did find out along the way was that the size of the splines are actually different between the manual transmission drive shaft and the automatic transmission drive shaft, and that's not a big deal if you have a donor drive shaft available to you. But if you were thinking that maybe you can just get your automatic drive shaft lengthened, that's not going to be the case, at least in the 4-cylinder applications. I found that the manual transmission size was different, and you cannot put the yoke of the automatic transmission drive shaft into the manual transmission. Like I said, not a big deal if you have a donor drive shaft, but if you don't, you'll have to find yourself one of those. All right, so on to what I would probably consider the only real headache that I ran across during this swap, and that is the hydraulic system for the clutch. I had a couple different problems with this. So as I discussed in one of the earlier videos, I bought all new components for this part of the system. I didn't really see any reason to reuse anything. So I bought a new release bearing and slave cylinder, clutch master cylinder, and the hydraulic line. I figured I'd just start fresh with brand new. The problem that I ran into was that some of the brands or makes of parts that I bought were different than others, and what I found out was that these connectors here, where the quick connect is for inside of the slave cylinder where it hooks up at the transmission, these were different, and I couldn't actually get these to go together. And unfortunately, I didn't find that out till I had the release bearing and slave cylinder inside of the transmission mounted in the truck already. Ideally, what I should have done is I should have actually checked the fitment of those two parts before I put anything in the truck. Wasn't something I thought of. I didn't even think that that was going to be an issue, so I didn't do that. Had I found that out whenever the parts were outside of the truck, I could have just swapped this connector out. It's just a roll pin that holds in place there into the slave cylinder, and you could swap it out to your old one, the old connector on your old slave cylinder, or something like that, and then move on. But unfortunately for me, I already had the transmission in the truck, and I had to deal with that with a lot more labor. So I highly recommend you test fit your parts before you put them in the truck, and save yourself the headache that I had. The second problem that I ran into was actually bleeding this system. I didn't really know it at the time, but these systems are notoriously hard to bleed. There's actually an air pocket that can get stuck up here in the master cylinder because of the way it's angled in the truck, and then there's another part down in the hydraulic line that tends to hold air as well. So when I had this all in the truck, I had it in there, and I was trying to bleed it like I normally would of any other hydraulic clutch system, and I just couldn't get it to go. No matter what I did, I couldn't get the clutch to disengage. It just was not bleeding. So what I ended up having to do is I had to take it back out of the truck and bleed it on the bench. When you bench bleed these systems, you can actually orient it in a way that those air pockets can get out, and you can bleed it properly. When I was trying to do that, I ran across another really good video here on YouTube. I think it was Perfection Clutch that did the video of bleeding one of these systems. If I can find the link to that video, I'll put that on the screen right now so you can help you out. And it was pretty easy to do. It was just kind of unfortunate that I had to take everything back out of the truck again as far as the master cylinder and the clutch line. It's not exactly the easiest thing to do once everything else is already installed. So it was an extra labor, again, that I had to do to get things right. Now there is a way around these two problems that I just talked about with the hydraulic system. You can buy these parts from certain manufacturers that are already bled with fluid in them. And I think you can actually buy them as complete kits too. So you get the master cylinder and the clutch line together, already bled, and then you're good to go. So you don't have to do any of that. You can just put it in the truck and go. And that also eliminates any worries as far as parts not fitting from different manufacturers, since the kit will come from one manufacturer. If I was going to do this all over again, that's probably what I would do. So that's sort of a lessons learned on my part. Something I wasn't really aware of at the time was, how hard these were to bleed and the issue that can come from that. So again, like I said, if I had to do it all over again, that's probably the route that I would take. I would just go ahead and buy a pre-bled system as a kit with all the parts that I needed. So as far as problems and suggestions, that's probably about it, other than what I've already talked about in some of the previous videos. The swap's pretty straightforward, especially if you have a donor vehicle like I did, or you can go to the junkyard and source all the parts you need. It's pretty much just transferring parts from one vehicle to the other. The swap is pretty labor intensive though, so if you have a buddy that can help you out with this, I highly recommend doing that. With that said though, I did do pretty much all of this myself. It can be done, but it would be a lot easier if you had an extra set of hands. One more thing I'll mention is back to drive shafts again. This is a good time to replace your U-joints while you have that out if you're messing around with drive shafts. I do have a video of how to do that. I'll put that link on the screen now. It's not that hard to do. You already have the drive shaft out of the truck and they're pretty cheap, so that's a good thing to do as well. So the only outstanding issue that I have left, and it was something I talked about in one of the earlier videos, was the lack of clutch position switch wiring in my truck. I did save the switch and the plug and some wires from the donor truck, but I don't have any of that wiring in my truck to connect to. So what I'm going to do eventually is tap into probably into the wires that go to the starter relay, run that through the clutch position switch, and make that function more like the factory setup does. For now, it's not really a big deal. I'm the only one that drives the truck, and I know how it operates, so I don't really see an issue. But for the long haul, I do want to take care of that. All right, so like I said, the truck is done, so let's go ahead and take it for a test drive.